Hi, everybody, and thank you for joining us today for our webinar, How to Properly Mothball Spray Foam Equipment. My name is Kim Melton, and I'm going to be the moderator for today's presentation. Before we dive into introductions, I would like to go through a few logistics. Just a brief disclaimer today, the information provided in this webinar shouldn't be used as a substitute for professional engineering design and/or documentation as required by building code, contracts, or even applicable laws. Also, please refer to any manufacturer-specific application guides or instructions and guarantee requirements on all projects. And then finally, also specific to your spray foam equipment, please refer to the owner's manual for all operations that we're going to discuss here today. Another thing I do want to go over is that, like many of you, we're all working from home, and so if we encounter any technical difficulties today, we will go ahead and record the webinar offline, and we'll send it to you once it's live and ready to go. And so if we run into any technical difficulties today, we'll go ahead and cancel this and move forward that way. Also today, we follow the webinar with a survey, and this is your opportunity to provide us with feedback on how we've done today. You can actually also use it to ask any additional questions you may have about the topic, or even suggest future topics you'd like to see in future webinars. But this survey is really part of how we deliver the JAME experience to you. And the JAME experience is listed down there in the bottom left corner as people, passion, perform, and protect. And we believe it's critical to make sure that we hear and understand and respond to your needs in order to deliver the best interaction to you. And we offer webinars like this one to help educate the market and be a tool and a resource for you and your business. But this isn't just a one-way street, so your feedback is really a key component to helping us evolve to better meet your needs. So if you have any comments or suggestions as to how we can better accomplish this, or even if you feel like maybe we've missed the mark today, we definitely encourage you to fill out the survey, and we'll use your feedback to improve our webinars and provide the information that has the most value to you in future webinars. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Daymon Stevens, my co-host and presenter for today, and he's going to get us started.
Okay, thanks, Kim. I appreciate everybody joining us today. As Kim said, my name is Daymon Stevens. I am one of the technical service representatives for JM. I run the parts and equipment division, and I've been with JM for 3 going on 4 years now. As we drop down through here today, one of the questions that I've had quite a bit here over the last couple of weeks, particularly with everything that's happening in the world and things slowing down, and got guys out there that have 3 and 4 and 5 rigs, and they don't have enough business at the point to keep all of them going, is, how do I actually properly shut down my rig? When you jump onto Google and online and some of the forums and stuff, and there's every possible scenario known to man on there. We want to go through that with you today. It's really not a hard process, but there's some proper things that you want to use when you're doing that. Basically, if you're going to look at your rig and you figure it's going to sit there for 30 days idle, you're going to want to go ahead and probably mothball it at that point. Most guys, they say, oh, I'm hoping to get back to work by the end of the month, but if there's a chance that you're not, it's a lot cheaper to mothball the rig and spend the money on the pump lube and the time it takes to do this than the anywhere from $4, $5, $6 to upwards of $14,000, $15,000 replacing heated hose and transfer pumps and heaters and things along those lines. This process may vary a little bit depending on what type of equipment you have. For today's WebEx, the piece of equipment we're using is our JM demo rig. It has an E30 integrated reactor 2 system on it, and the transfer pump that we are using is going to be a T2 transfer pump. The materials that we're going to need to mothball a rig, first and foremost, will be the correct PPE, your nitrile gloves. We're going to need 3 clean 5-gallon buckets, package of terry cloths. You can pick these up, as you can see that one there's Home Depot. And you're, depending on length of your heated hose, we're going to start, basically somewhere in between 8 to 10 gallons worth of pump lube and or TSL. The other thing we're going to do is we're going to build a transfer pump storage tube so that we have the way to store that transfer pump submerged in pump lube, so we don't have an issue with the ISO drying to it and crystallizing on the outside of it while it's sitting in storage. You're going to need this list of components here. The 35-inch listed tube here is for the transfer pump we're using, being in a drum length transfer pump. If you're using a little stubby for a 5-gallon bucket or whatever, a tote or whatever length your transfer pump is, you'll need to adjust that accordingly. It's going to be built out of either ABS or PVC. Make sure whatever cement you get is compatible with that. We're going to want a cap that we can seal the bottom of it off. And there is a, let me see if I can get this thing here to do my little laser pointer thing. I picked up all of these parts here just at the local Home Depot. I had to go to a sprinkler supply store in order to get this 3-inch by 2-inch MPT threaded fitting. One thing you want to make positive is that on this fitting, after it comes through the threads, that reducer does not neck down at all. If it does, your transfer pump will not slide through it. So once we've got all of our parts and stuff to put this together, basically step one, we're going to come onto the rig just as if we're getting ready to go start spraying for the day. We're going to get our generator and our power source set up. We're going to have our air compressor turned on. We're going to turn the proportioner on. Once the proportioner is on, we're going to go ahead and activate the heat zones for the A-side primary heater and for the hose heat. We're going to ensure that the machine is in the parked position. One of the things when we get done with this, a lot of times there's not enough material there left in the system and or the ability to push the transfer pump to park the machine after the flush is done and after it's been mothballed. So we want to make sure the machine is parked prior to starting this. One of the other questions that comes up here once in a while is, what am I doing with the B side? The B side of your machine is not really relevant. It can sit there with resin in it for however long it needs to sit there. There's nothing there that's going to harden up or dry out or crystallize or create any problems. So we don't need to do anything to the B side at all. We're going to move down here. While the machine is heating up, there's a couple of things we're going to want to do. We're going to get our gun off from our hose. One thing we want to make sure of here, all of us are used to turning the valves and stuff on our gun on and basically holding it in a spraying position with the valves facing down. You may want to take and put a piece of tape or something along those lines over the B side valve to ensure that as we're introducing the ISO back into the drum, there's not a chance of opening the B side valve and putting resin back into our ISO drum and contaminating that drum. The other thing we're going to do is, while the hose is heating up, we're going to go ahead and build our storage tube. We will put the cap on the bottom, glue it on, put the coupler on the top, and glue the reducer into that. Once we get that part done, it can just basically sit to the side until we get to the end and we're ready to actually put the transfer pump in it. We're going to remove the transfer pump from the ISO drum. First thing, before we pull that out of the drum, we're going to take our first bucket and we're going to put 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever you want to put in the bottom of it, of your terry claws in the bottom. And then we're going to pull that transfer pump out of the drum. We're going to set it into that bucket, allowing it to set and rest on those terry claws. Go ahead and just lean it over against the drum or someplace that it's not going to take a chance of tipping over. And then once we get that there, we're going to, at that point, position the gun manifold over the bung hole in the ISO drum. That will allow us to just return that ISO back to the drum. This is a better operation done with 2 guys. That way one guy can be taking care of the transfer pump and operating that, while the second person is keeping control of the manifold and opening the manifold valves and making sure that everything's pointed in the right direction as we're moving fluids. Once we get to this point here, one of the things I forgot to kind of bring up as far as our materials list, most of us, if we have Graco pumps, we will have this needle valve already comes from Graco. It's part of the equipment package that comes with your transfer pump. If you're using a different pump, if this needle valve is not working, if whatever, we have to have some manner in which to control the amount of air that's coming into this transfer pump. These transfer pumps are capable of pushing air the same as they're capable of pushing fluids. The problem is, as we all know, anytime a drum runs out of material and it starts dry hammering, when that transfer pump has full air pressure to it, how bad it can jump and bounce and create havoc there in the back of a truck. You can imagine what that is going to do if it no longer has a 55-gallon drum hooked to it in order to contain it as it starts bouncing around the back of your truck like a pogo stick. So make sure that we have some type of either a needle valve or air regulator or whatever you've got to put in line, ball valve, whatever you're going to use, so that you can control the amount of air coming into this transfer pump. First thing we're going to do at this point is make sure that is closed. We're going to go ahead and turn off the A preheaters at the machine, and we're going to turn off our hose heat at this point. We're going to slightly open that needle valve, and we're going to allow that pump to start to operate at a manageable pace as it starts to move up and down. And we're going to open the A side valve on the gun manifold. This will start to push air through the system from the transfer pump, returning the ISO back to the drum. This is all good ISO. We'll recapture that and just be able to reuse it later when we go back to work. Once we get that ISO returned to the drum and we actually start to push air through this system, we'll go ahead and close that manifold valve and close the needle valve of the transfer pump. If you have a recirculation, not all systems, all equipment out there have recirculation kits. If you do have a recirculation kit at this point, we're going to remove that recirculation tube from the drum, remove the hose, remove whatever it is you have for a recirculation system. And we're going to push the ISO from that system back into the drum as well, basically following the same procedure that we use to push the ISO out of the heated hose. We're going to just place that return tube over the bunghole and push some air through that system until we get air out of it, at which point we will shut the recirc valve back to the normal position at the machine, shut the needle valve on the transfer pump, and we'll be ready to actually start pushing some pump lube through and flushing the heated hose portion of our system. Depending on how much heated hose you have, the amount of material that we're going to need for this is going to vary a little bit. We're going to start with 2.5 to 3 gallons worth of material in the bucket. At this point, you'll make sure that once again, before air or anything gets put back onto the transfer pump, if you've disconnected it for any reason, that the needle valve is closed and the manifold valve with the gun manifold is closed as well. Connect the air back to the transfer pump, slowly open the needle valve. As you can see right here, I have attached one of the terry cloths here to the side of the transfer pump. This transfer pump is moving around, and I now have a bucket full of pump lube down here. I just kind of use that terry cloth one to help a little bit of splash if anything happens to come up off the transfer pump, but mostly to cushion the transfer pump as it's moving back and forth against the bucket so we're not tipping the bucket over and dumping, 2-3 gallons worth of pump lube and ice all over the back of the rig. We're going to place the gun manifold as shown right here along the edge of the bucket. We want to make sure that's positioned in a manner that as we open that manifold valve up, that the material that starts coming out of it is aimed in a controllable pattern there. When we first open that up, it's just going to start spitting because it has all of the air that's in the lines here at the moment. We're going to run that until we start to get a steady flow of material through the heated hose. We're going to go back over to the proportioner. We will at that point turn back on the A-side preheater and the hose heat. Let that come up to temperature. We're going to circulate that for approximately 10 minutes. When you first start circulating that and you're pushing that pump lube through the heated hoses, you're going to notice that material is pretty thick, and it's basically what we're pushing out of there for the most part is ISO there to begin with. As that circulates and pushes through there and it heats up and starts to actually flush that out, obviously the heat's going to thin it down, but you're also going to notice that instead of being, a dark gold ISO color that's coming out the end of that hose, it's going to start to clear up, and you'll see as it's reintroducing itself down into the bottom of the bucket that the mixture is starting to flush out the ISO. Once we've ran that for 10 minutes, we'll close the gun manifold, close the needle valve, and shut off both of the heat zones at the proportioner. The next step here, once again, if your system is equipped with a recirculation system, we're going to remove that recirculation tube. I'm speaking as in a Graco recirculation system that has the tube that goes down in the 3/4 inch bung hole on the drum. We're going to pull that tube out of there. We're going to place that into the same bucket number 2 that has the transfer pump in it at this point. And we're going to turn the recirculation valve at the machine on, open the needle valve of the transfer pump, and we're going to circulate that material from bucket number 2 through the recirculation system for 2 to 3 minutes. That material is already going to be warm from being circulated through the system with the heaters on, and it'll do a good job of recirculating that and flushing that recirculation system out. Once that's flushed, we'll go ahead and close the recirculation valve back to the normal position at the machine and shut back down the needle valve on the pump. We're going to take that transfer pump at this point. We're going to go back to bucket number 1 with our terry cloths in it. And we're going to take a minute here at this point. We're going to have quite a bit of stuff splashing around on the pump as we were introducing the fluid back to the bucket. We're going to wipe down the transfer pump. We're going to clean it up, get any residual ISO off, or basically get it as clean as we can for storage purposes later on in the process here. We're also going to, at that point, if we have the recirculation tube there, move it over here and wipe that recirculation tube down and clean it up as well. The next thing we're going to do here is that we're going to take that material that we just put in the lines and we're going to flush that back out of the system. So the same way in which we removed the ISO from the lines originally, the transfer pump is now sitting in bucket number 1 with the terry cloths. We're going to open the A-side valve on the gun manifold, and we're going to slowly open the needle valve on the transfer pump, allowing the transfer pump to operate at a manageable pace. Once again, remember we're pumping air now, not fluid, so it has an ability to take off and get away from you. Push that flushed out material all the way through the heated line so we get to where we're just pushing air out of it again, close the manifold valve, and then we're going to go back and do the same thing again for the recirculation system. Once again, we're going to take that tube out of bucket number 1, hold it over bucket number 2, open back up the needle valve, and push that recirculated flushed material out of the recirculation system into bucket number 2. For our final flush, this is going to be the material that we're going to leave in our system when we're done. We're going to take bucket number 3. We're going to put that same 2.5 to 3 gallons of material in that. One thing to kind of back up here a little bit, as you're putting that material in the first time in bucket number 1 to push that air out of there, if you get to where you need more material, obviously in the bucket, at the bottom of the bucket, just add that to your bucket there, keeping track in your own mind of, okay, in order to actually fill the amount of heated hose that I had to use 3 or 3.5 gallons of material when I pushed that air out of there the first time. Whatever that was, that's the same amount you're going to have to use here. Fill it back up. Difference on this one is that if we have a recirculation system, we are going to push that air back out of it first. We're not going to work on the heated hose at this point. We're going to push the air out of the recirculation system first. So we're going to take that recirculation tube and we're going to put it back into bucket number 2. We're going to open up the needle valve on the transfer pump and push the fresh pump lube through the recirculation system. Once we get to where we're getting clear pump lube out of the recirculation system going back into bucket number 2, we are now shut the needle valve, set the recirculation tube back into bucket number 1 so it can drain into the terry cloths we have in the bottom of it, and the recirculation system is now mothballed and done. We're going to come back to the transfer pump and the heated hose side of this at this point. We're going to open back up the transfer pump, and we're going to take and put the gun manifold back over the first bucket. We're going to purge that air back out of there with the fresh pump lube until we get to where we got some clean pump lube coming out of the heated hose, at which point you'll go ahead and close the manifold valve at the gun manifold, move it over to bucket number 3 with your fresh pump lube in it, and then we're going to allow that to circulate through the system for 1 to 2 minutes, just to push that through, getting extra air back out of the system, and make sure we got a good solid fill on the heated hose. At this point, we're going to go ahead and close the transfer pump needle valve. We're going to close the A side valve on the manifold. We're going to remove the air from the transfer pump, and we can go ahead and shut down the proportioner. We're going to take our transfer tube that we've built. We're going to fill that 1/3 to half full. Look into that. Basically, if you got a flashlight and you're dropping your transfer pump down into that tube, we just want to make sure that we have enough pump lube in there that we're covering up and over our tubes and our risers that are coming up, but we don't want it obviously running out the top of the tube and making a mess all over. Go ahead at that point, secure the bung adapter down into your reducer, tighten that so it's nice and sealed. As you can see over here in our corner, we basically just took ours and set it back here behind 2 of our 55-gallon drums of ISO. That's going to keep it out of the way, and it's not going to be able to fall over, hurt anybody, or damage anything. And then if you have a recirculation system, at that point you'll just kind of take that back out of bucket number 1, put it into like a 55-gallon black garbage bag or whatever it is you want it to store it. I've seen guys actually go ahead and build a storage tube for the recirculation tube as well, which works great. Whichever one works out the best for you. Main thing is just seal it up and place it in a place that can be stored. That is the end of what we need to do.
Thanks so much, Daymon. So That was your overview on mothballing spray foam systems, but I do want to talk about some of our upcoming webinars we have in this 5 Live series. So the 5 Live webinar series is 5 webinars over the next 5 weeks. Today was the first one, and they're hosted by our TechConnect team. And so upcoming, we have blowing wool machine maintenance, or blowing wool machine and accessory checklist, spray foam gun maintenance, net and blow wall installation, and then SPF 10 golden rules. And so over the next 5 weeks, we will have more webinars like this one that are just really highlighting some of the more technical sides of spray foam and blowing wool. And you'll be getting a live presentation from our TechConnect team. And then in addition to these 5 webinars, we have 3 AIA certified webinars that are coming up. The first one is Walls That Work. The second one is Architectural Acoustics. And the third one is Continuous Insulation. These webinars are all AIA certified for one learning unit. They're an hour long, and they will also be followed with a Q&A like we're going to have here today. So if you have any interest in those, we are sending out emails. We have links to them on our website that you'll be able to find where you can register for any of these webinars. And with that, let's go ahead and get into some questions. We had a number of questions that were pre-submitted with the registrations, and then some that have come in as the presentation has gone on. So I'll go ahead and start with our pre-submitted questions. And the first one for you, Daymon, is where is the best place to store clean parts?
Hopefully you have a toolbox or a cabinet or something along those lines that you have everything sorted out and in a place there for your inventory of your repair parts. The main thing is you want to have them stored in a manner that obviously as you're going down the road that they can't fall off or break or damage anything else in the back of the truck. Your gun, one thing we didn't go over that there, at this point in the mothballing procedure, most guys will clean that gun manifold up really thoroughly, some carb cleaner or something there on the end of it to make sure there's no residual resin and or ISO on it, and then go ahead and rebuild the gun at that point so that it's just basically mothballed as well, clean and fresh, ready to go back to work when you're done. But most of the guys will store those parts and stuff right there in their toolbox or a cabinet on the truck.
Excellent. When I'm mothballing my rig, do I need to do it in a well-ventilated area?
It's not going to hurt to have it in a ventilated area. Once again, we need to have proper PPE on while we're doing this. We are still moving ISO around, and we need to have the proper breathing and coveralls, whatever else you're going to normally use, you would use for spraying in an everyday environment. So
that
the ventilation helps, but okay.
So the next question is, do I need a respirator and protective suit like I do during an installation?
Yes, I mean, at the end of the day, we're working with things that, particularly when you haven't done this multiple times, you're opening ball valves, you're opening the needle valves and stuff on transfer pumps. If somebody forgot to shut something down and all of a sudden we had a big old blast of ISO or something come shooting off into a bucket or something, we want to make sure that we've got proper PPE on in order to protect ourselves from getting soaked down with ISO, or same scenario when we've got air that's pressurized and we're kind of atomizing that ISO that's coming out of the gun. We're pushing the air back out of there. That's going to get out into the room, and we're not going to want to be breathing that either. So.
All right, excellent. The next one is, are there any startup precautions I need to take into account when I restart my machine after it's been mothballed?
For the most part, this material, that's one of the things that's nice about it, making sure, like I said, there's stuff out there, I'm using diesel, I'm using solvents, when you use the pump lube, it's compatible with everything we've got in there. It's compatible with your hoses, all your O-rings, everything in the machine. And when you go to start it back up, I've started these machines up. We started one up here at the Belgrade facility here a while back that had been sitting there for a couple of years. And we went back, hooked some air up to the transfer pump. It took it a second for the transfer pump to get moving. But once it kind of broke loose there, inside of a matter of 30 minutes, we basically done this procedure backwards, only we introduced the ISO back into the system instead of introducing the pump lube into it. Instead of 30, 40 minutes, we had that machine back up and it was ready to go back to work and start spraying foam. So there's not a whole lot as far as bringing it back out of a mothballed status or state. It's just basically perform this same procedure, only with putting the ISO in instead of pump lube.
All right. Does the seasonal temperature change anything in the mothballing process if it's very hot or very cold, for example?
Should not. I mean, as far as temperatures, obviously, the material in our drum and the material in our lines, when we're first trying to get material from the transfer pump and we're pushing that air through there, up at, the very first time we're pushing that air to push the ISO back into the drum, if the back of that truck is down in the 30s, 40s, 50s, the material on those supply lines is going to be awful thick, and we may have a little bit of trouble getting that moving. Once it actually gets to the machine, we've got the preheater and the hose heat on there. At that point, it'll move relatively easily. We can get the material heated back up. As far as outside temps, the main thing, if it's actually down below 55, 60 degrees inside the back of the truck, you may want to warm that up a little bit just so we can get the material and the supply lines to get up.
All right, excellent. The next question is, how long can I store my equipment this way?
I would say basically, and you could store it that way indefinitely. The pump lube is fully compatible with our hoses and our O-rings and things in our guns and our high pressure pumps, whether it's hydraulic, electric, or any other type of pump. It would, like I said, it's the one we pulled out here the other day had been sitting there for over 2 years. So it's not something that's got a real timeline on it that it's going to expire if you don't get it out of the system by a certain time. It can sit there as long as it needs to in order to protect the equipment.
All right. The next question is, how do we store hoses?
Well, you can have them on your hose rack. Obviously, at this point, I kind of went over there a second ago about the, cleaning up the gun manifold. Some guys, I can't personally imagine storing it with the gun still hooked to it because it's, that gun needs to be cleaned out. And I guess if you serviced your gun and get it all ready to go back into service, you could put it back on the hose and hang it off the rack. But for the most part, your hoses are just going to hang on the rack the way they normally do. There's no real issues as far as anything separating or phase separation or anything of the pump lube. It's just going to be a solid pump lube fluid inside the hose that can sit there.
All right. Our final question is, can peanut oil be used in place of TSL? I'm going to lean to the pump lube is what the TSL pump lube, DOP, is what we are recommending that is used in this system. That's the lube that is recommended by Graco. That's compatible with all of their O-rings. We want to make sure that whatever we're putting in these systems, particularly if they're going to sit for a while, is compatible with what the hoses and the internal workings are made out of. And I can't tell you that peanut lube or peanut oil does or does not have any type of an interaction or problem with the O-rings and hoses that are used in these systems. So as per recommendations from Graco, which is the equipment that we're using for this demonstration, their recommendation would be TSL and or pump lube, same thing. All right, excellent. That wraps up all of our questions for today. So if you have any additional questions that you think of, or maybe you didn't ask today, you can actually submit those in our survey that is going to open up as soon as we shut down the webinar here today. And then again, our next webinar will be next Tuesday at the exact same time, and we hope to see you there.